The galaxy ran every simulation. None of them predicted humans. The human ship never fired a shot. It didn't have time. One moment it was gliding through open transit space. Engines cold, weapons offline. Crew relaxed under the false safety of neutrality. The next, the stars twisted violently as emerald lances of energy tore through the hull. No warning, no demand to surrender, no declaration of hostility. The Vexator ambush was precise, merciless, and absolute. Explosions rippled through the ship's spine. Compartments depressurized in seconds. Crew members were thrown against bulkheads. Alarms screaming as gravity failed, and emergency systems fought to keep the vessel alive. They failed. The ship broke apart over the rust-colored skies of Tharmilla, a dead world by most galactic standards, a prison world by Vexator design. Roughly a third of the human crew survived the descent, burned, bleeding, half-conscious in the wreckage scattered across a barren plain of black stone and toxic dust. They never saw the Vexators arrive, not until armored shadows surrounded them, tall, angular, encased in dark exoskeletal armor etched with ritual markings. Vexator soldiers moved with mechanical discipline, weapons already raised, not to kill, but to claim. Any human who resisted was stunned. Any who couldn't stand was dragged. Any who tried to speak was ignored. The Vexators did not converse with prey. Within hours, the survivors were shackled and loaded onto transport barges, their military insignia torn from uniforms and discarded into the dust like worthless debris. Their destination lay beneath the surface of Tharmilla, the mines of Ferrith, a vast subterranean network carved into the planet's crust, illuminated by sickly crimson light and the constant hum of extraction engines. The air was thick with particulate matter, laced with faint energy signatures that made exposed skin itch and eyes burn. This was where the Vexators harvested Articulus, a rare mineral, a dangerous one. In sufficient quantities, Articulus could weaken the barriers between dimensions, allowing entities from beyond reality to cross into the physical plane through ritual invocation. The Vexators believed this would make them gods. They believed it would grant them dominion over the eastern Milky Way. To fuel this ambition, they needed labor, and labor to them was disposable. The humans were marched into the mines alongside dozens of other species, thin, malnourished figures with hollow eyes. Some bore scars from failed escape attempts. Others moved with the dull obedience of beings who had long since lost hope. Alien whispers spread quickly. New ones. They won't last. No one does. The Vexator overseers watched with detached interest as the humans were issued mining tools, explosive collars, and a single rule translated into rough galactic standard. Work or die. They expected fear. They expected collapse. What they got instead was silence. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of assessment. The humans took in everything. Tunnel layouts, guard rotations, weapon types, ritual markings etched near Articulus veins. Eyes flicked, hands tightened, breathing slowed. Most Vexators missed it entirely. After all, these were prisoners now, broken survivors of a shattered ship. What the Vexators did not understand, what no empire ever truly understood, was that they had not captured civilians. They had captured trained soldiers, men and women whose entire existence revolved around surviving hostile territory, improvising under fire, and turning disadvantage into leverage. As the first human pickaxe struck Articulus stone, a faint vibration rippled through the mine. Deep, unseen, unnoticed, but somewhere in the dark, something listened, and for the first time in years, the other prisoners felt it. Hope. The mines of Ferrith never slept. Day and night were meaningless concepts beneath Tharmilla's crust. Time was measured in shifts, in quotas, in how long a body could endure before collapsing. Articulus veins pulsed faintly within the rock, glowing with an inner crimson light that made shadows crawl unnaturally along the tunnel walls. The mineral hummed when struck, a low vibration that sank into bone and thought alike. For the prisoners, this sound became constant. Human hands blistered within hours. Muscle screamed. Lungs burned with every breath of contaminated air. The Vexators cared nothing for efficiency beyond raw output. Broken workers were simply replaced. And yet, the humans adapted. They learned how to strike the stone at angles that reduced recoil. They wrapped torn fabric around handles to spare their palms. They rotated labor without being told, silently distributing exhaustion so no single body failed too quickly. Fixator overseers noticed the output increase. They approved. Around the humans, other prisoners watched with cautious disbelief. There were Zarathi, insectoid beings whose fragile limbs trembled constantly. Corlin, broad-backed quadrupeds bred for endurance and beaten when they slowed. Eshari, luminous-skinned bipeds who had once been scholars and now barely spoke. All had tried to escape, all had failed, and all had learned the same lesson. Hope was dangerous. The humans did not share that belief. Within days, subtle changes began. Human prisoners listened more than they spoke. During ration breaks, they positioned themselves near guards, not to confront them, but to observe communication patterns, armor seams, and reaction times. They memorized Fixator language fragments quickly, enough to understand commands, enough to anticipate punishment, enough to avoid it. At night, if the long maintenance pauses could be called night, humans exchanged information in near silence. Taps on stone, hand signals hidden behind hunched shoulders, phrases spoken in fragments of old military jargon that sounded like exhaustion-induced nonsense to untrained ears. Other species began noticing. A Zarathi worker collapsed under a load too heavy for its frame. A human stepped in without hesitation, redistributed the weight, and kept the quota intact, preventing collective punishment. A Corlin was beaten for slowing. 2 humans subtly altered the next blast charge, collapsing a secondary tunnel and forcing a shift change that spared further abuse. These were not acts of heroism. They were tactical kindness, calculated, deliberate, dangerous. Fixator discipline relied on isolation, on convincing prisoners that survival was individual, not collective. Humans dismantled that without a word. One by one, alien prisoners began gravitating toward them during breaks. At first, just proximity. Then quiet questions. How long until you break? When will you try to run? Why are you still looking around? A human answered one question honestly. We're not planning to run. That unsettled everyone. Instead, the humans watched the ritual chambers. Deep shafts branched off from the main mines, guarded more heavily than any articulous vein. Symbols carved into obsidian walls pulsed when workers passed. Every few cycles, Fixator priest castes descended, chanting in harmonic patterns that made prisoners' teeth ache. Articulus was transferred there in massive quantities. Something was being prepared. Human military instincts screamed warnings. This wasn't industry. It was prelude. As the days dragged on, something else became apparent. Articulus affected humans differently. Other species avoided prolonged contact. It induced lethargy, confusion, hallucinations. Humans felt pressure, like static under the skin, like emotions amplified rather than dulled. Anger burned hotter. Fear sharpened focus. Grief became fuel. A human medic quietly confirmed it. Whatever this stuff does, she whispered, it doesn't weaken us. It stimulates us. The realization spread carefully, slowly, dangerously. The Fixators believed Articulus would make them gods. They never considered that it might make their prisoners unstoppable. By the end of the cycle, something irreversible had happened. The prisoners were no longer a collection of broken individuals. They were becoming a network, and at its core, human minds were already sketching blueprints in the dark. The idea began as a whisper, not a meeting, not a speech, just a quiet statement passed from human to human, then carefully to others. We don't escape the minds. That sentence alone was enough to kill most plans before they were spoken. Escape had been attempted countless times, through tunnels, through bribery, through brute force. Every attempt ended the same way. Public executions, tighter collars, fewer rations. The humans knew this. That was why their plan went deeper. We stopped the ritual. The weight of that idea spread quickly through the prisoner network. Stopping the ritual meant confronting the Fixators at their strongest. It meant attacking guarded chambers, priest castes, armored enforcers. It meant triggering fail-safes designed to collapse entire mine sectors. It meant death. Alien prisoners reacted with disbelief. You cannot fight them, an Eshari whispered. They will erase you, said a Corlin, voice shaking. Even if you win, the planet will kill you, warned another. The humans didn't argue. They laid out facts. Articulous extraction schedules, guard shift overlaps, energy spikes during ritual preparation, structural weaknesses in the mind supports, points the Vixators themselves had marked centuries ago. Humans saw a battlefield where others saw a grave. Most importantly, they identified the flaw no one else had dared consider. The Vixators believed only they could control what Articula summoned. They were wrong. The humans had noticed something during extraction. Tiny anomalies, when large quantities of a mineral were gathered too closely. Objects vibrating without cause. Shadows moving against the light. Something responded to intention. And human intention was not subtle. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Stage a multi-species uprising to overwhelm outer mind security. Use chaos as cover to seize Articula stockpiles. Force entry into a ritual chamber, not to stop the invocation, but to hijack it. This was where most prisoners recoiled. Summoning interdimensional beings is suicide, a Zarathi hissed. They will consume you, another insisted. They cannot be controlled, came the final verdict. A human officer, face hollow with exhaustion, answered quietly. We're not trying to control it. Silence followed. We're trying to aim it. The logic was terrifying. Humans did not intend to survive the summoning. They intended to become the anchor. Volunteers stepped forward immediately. Too many. Experienced soldiers, medics, engineers, even those barely standing. Leadership had to be enforced, another human trait that shocked the others. No, the commander said. We choose based on necessity, not courage. Roles were assigned. Some would trigger explosions to sever mind sectors and isolate Vixator reinforcements. Some would sabotage control nodes and weapon caches. Some would escort non-combatants to staging tunnels leading toward the surface. And a very small group would enter the ritual chamber with enough Articulus to rip open reality itself. The name came later. A Brahmin, a pattern glimpsed in Keeper fragments stolen long ago by Vixator scholars. A being described not as malevolent or benevolent, but transactional. It answered those who paid the price. The humans understood exactly what that meant. As preparation spread, something unexpected happened. The alien prisoners didn't back away. They leaned in. The Zarathi offered their tunneling expertise. The Corlin provided raw strength and living shields. The Ashari shared knowledge of ancient symbology, once dismissed as myth. What had been a human plan became a coalition of the condemned. The Vixators noticed none of this. From their perspective, output was stable. Discipline held. Fear remained sufficient. They did not realize that fear had changed sides. When the final signal was agreed upon, a controlled detonation in Shaft 7, the humans shared one last truth with their allies. This will work. Not might, not hope, will. Because the Vixators had built their empire on the assumption that no one would ever be desperate enough to weaponize the unknown. Humans had always lived there. The explosion in Shaft 7 was not large. It didn't need to be. A precisely placed charge ruptured a structural junction the Vixators had reinforced centuries ago, never expecting prisoners to understand why it mattered. The shock wave rippled sideways instead of outward. Lights flickered, gravity stuttered, and for half a second, every explosive collar in the lower mind levels lost synchronization. That was enough. Human prisoners moved instantly, not with panic, not with hesitation, with training. Tools became weapons. Mining lasers were redirected at joints and visors. Articulous charges, meant for controlled extraction, were hurled into guard clusters and detonated with violent crimson flashes. Vixator overseers died screaming. Their armor, designed to resist plasma and kinetics, offered little protection against point-blank overloads and improvised explosives. Alarms howled across Ferrith. Security bulkheads slammed shut, but not before coordinated groups slipped through passages mapped weeks earlier. Zarathi tunnelers collapsed side corridors, cutting off reinforcements. Corlin fighters charged headlong into suppressive fire, absorbing punishment long enough for humans to flank. For the first time in generations, the mines fought back. Vixator command units attempted to reassert control, broadcasting execution protocols and mass detonation threats. They failed. Human engineers had anticipated this. Control nodes were severed, signal relays destroyed. Entire sections of the mine went dark, leaving Vixator troops blind and disoriented in terrain they had never learned to navigate manually. Close quarters combat erupted. Humans fought brutally, efficiently. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no mercy. They targeted nerve clusters, armor seams, communication nodes. They used the environment, low ceilings, narrow tunnels, unstable supports, as force multipliers. Alien prisoners followed, not as soldiers, as survivors, with nothing left to lose. A Zerathi detonated itself beneath a Vixator heavy squad, collapsing a shaft and sealing a reinforcement route forever. A Corlin tore a mounted cannon from its base and turned it on the ritual guards. The mine shook as secondary explosions rippled through articulous storage chambers, deliberate, controlled, terrifyingly close to catastrophic. Vixator priest castes finally realized the truth. This was not a riot. This was a campaign. As chaos spread upward, a human strike group reached the outer staging tunnels. Explosives blew access hatches wide, revealing something no prisoner had seen before. The sky. Tharmilla's toxic clouds rolled endlessly overhead, stained crimson by industrial runoff and atmospheric processors. Dropships hovered in the distance, responding to emergency signals too late to matter. Human command made the call. Phase 2. Now, surface teams moved to seize anti-air batteries. Internal teams pressed toward the ritual chambers, carrying crates of concentrated articulus scavenged at great cost. Casualties mounted. Humans fell. Aliens fell. But the rebellion did not slow. It accelerated, because something else was happening. Deep beneath the mines, where reality was already thin, the growing concentration of articulus began to resonate. The hum became a roar. Shadows twisted. Symbols carved by Vixator hands glowed brighter than they ever had before. They had prepared for obedience. They had prepared for control. They had not prepared for defiance. As human-led forces breached the final sanctum gates, Vixator priests began chanting frantically, not to complete the ritual, but to contain it. Too late, the rebellion had reached the heart of Ferrith, and reality itself was starting to crack. The ritual chamber was wrong, not incomplete, not damaged, wrong. Its geometry twisted perception, angles bent subtly inward. The floor was etched with concentric sigils that pulsed in rhythm with the massive articulus pylons surrounding the central dais. This place was never meant to host prisoners. It was meant to host gods. Vixator priests laid dead across the chamber. Some cut down mid-chant. Others crushed beneath falling pylons as explosives reshaped the space. Their blood flowed into grooves designed to channel power. That only made the problem worse. Human strike teams secured the perimeter with ruthless efficiency, sealing blast doors and erecting improvised barricades. And then they did something no civilization had ever documented. They completed the ritual, not as written, not as intended. Human engineers rerouted power conduits into the sigil array. Medics stabilized the volunteers chosen for the center. Linguists and scholars, working from half-understood alien texts, corrected symbolic errors the Vixators had repeated for centuries. Because the Vixators believed domination required command, the ritual did not. It required offering. Crates of articulus were stacked higher than any safe threshold. The mineral screamed as energy coursed through it, the sound vibrating through teeth and bone. The air thickened, breathing became painful, and then the volunteers stepped forward. 6 humans, all military, all fully aware they would not return. They stood at the heart of the array, removing their explosive collars without hesitation. Their heart rate spiked, not from fear, but anticipation. A human commander gave the order. Begin. The chant was not spoken aloud. It was felt. Human emotion flooded the chamber. Rage at enslavement, grief for the fallen, defiance sharpened by certainty. The sigils flared. Reality buckled. A vertical fracture tore open above the dais, not like a wound, but like a door being forced against its will. Darkness poured out, not empty darkness, structured, aware. The chamber temperature plummeted as something vast pressed through, its presence crushing thought itself. Vixator doctrine had warned of this. They had ignored the footnotes. A voice emerged, not sound, but pressure shaped into meaning. Who calls? Human lungs burned. One volunteer answered anyway. We do. The fracture widened. Limbs, if they could be called that, emerged, composed of layered geometries that hurt to observe. Symbols shifted across its surface, rearranging themselves as it analyzed the room. Payment? The humans did not hesitate. Us. There was a pause. Then the entity spoke its name. I am a Brahmin. The chamber screamed as the being fully manifested, not contained, not bound, but present. Its form stabilized only because the humans refused to collapse. Vixator reinforcements hammered at the sealed doors, chanting counter-rituals in panic. They understood now. The humans had not summoned a servant. They had summoned a force of consequence. A Brahmin turned slowly toward the barriers separating it from the Vixators. They saw dominion. It intoned, "You seek escape." Human blood pooled on the sigils as volunteers strained to remain conscious. Yes, the commander asked. And their end? A vibration rippled through a Brahmin's form. Something like approval. Then witness. The doors shattered inward, and the Vixators finally faced the thing they had dreamed of controlling. A Brahmin moved. Not forward, not downward, across. Its presence expanded through the ritual chamber as if space itself were an inconvenience rather than a rule. The symbols etched into the walls ignited simultaneously, then melted, unable to contain what they had helped summon. Vixator soldiers poured through the shattered doors, firing without hesitation. Their weapons did nothing. Energy bolts slowed, distorted, then folded inward, compressed into impossible points before vanishing entirely. Kinetic rounds struck a Brahmin's form and ceased to exist, erased at the moment of contact. The first Vixator screamed when the air around him collapsed. Not crushed, pulverized. His armor imploded, his body reduced to particulate matter drawn into a spiraling void that snapped shut an instant later. Panic erupted. Vixator doctrine collapsed alongside their soldiers. Priests shouted contradictory counterrites, frantically carving new symbols into the floor with trembling claws. A Brahmin regarded them with something approaching curiosity. You desired authority over that which does not kneel, it intoned. Correction follows. Reality obeyed. Entire squads were lifted from the ground, stretched into elongated silhouettes, then unraveled thread by thread. Others were flattened into the walls, absorbed into the stone, as if they had always belonged there. The ritual chamber became a slaughterhouse beyond physics. Humans watched in grim silence. This was not triumph. This was inevitability. A Brahmin's attention shifted upward, through kilometers of rock and infrastructure, toward the surface installations, command spires, and planetary control nodes. Its form fractured into overlapping manifestations, each phasing through solid matter as if it were mist. Across Tharmilla, Vixator strongholds vanished. Mining complexes collapsed inward. Orbital control towers folded into themselves. Anti-air batteries detonated as internal dimensions inverted. The planet screamed. Vixator command attempted evacuation. They failed. Ships lifting from the surface were caught mid-ascent phase, crushed into singularities that winked out of existence, leaving nothing behind, not even debris. The humans felt the strain. The volunteers anchoring the ritual were dying. One by one, their bodies failed, nervous systems overloaded, hearts rupturing under forces never meant for flesh. Each death strengthened the link. Each sacrifice sharpened a Brahmin's manifestation. The being turned back toward the chamber as the last Vixator presence within range was erased. Debt is settled, it declared. The remaining humans fell to their knees. A commander, blood running freely from his nose and ears, forced himself to speak. Now, let us go. A Brahmin regarded them for a long moment. Then, gently, almost reverently, it began to withdraw. Not violently, not resentfully, as if honoring the transaction. The dimensional fracture collapsed inward, consuming the articulous pylons in a cascade of annihilation. The remaining mineral destabilized, cracking and evaporating into inert dust. The ritual was over. The cost had been paid. The mines fell silent. For the first time in generations, Tharmilla belonged to no one. The silence didn't last. Systems across Tharmilla began to fail in cascading waves. Power grids collapsed. Atmospheric processors sputtered. The planet, stripped of Vixator control and destabilized by interdimensional backlash, was tearing itself apart. The mines were dying. Human command didn't waste a second. Evacuation protocol. All groups move. Now, prisoners flooded the tunnels. Humans and aliens together, dragging the wounded, carrying the exhausted, moving through corridors that shook and cracked as ancient supports failed. Behind them, entire mine sectors collapsed into voids where Abraham's presence had rewritten reality. Ahead of them lay the surface, and waiting on it, Vixator cargo ships. 2 heavy cargo ships, scarred but operational, sitting on emergency pads near the primary extraction spire. Their crews were gone, their weapons half-powered, their engines unstable. They would have to do. Human teams reached the hangar zones under fire. Automated defense turrets, untouched by the entity's purge, activated, raking the ground with suppressive fire. Humans advanced anyway, using debris as cover, returning fire with scavenged weapons and stolen Vixator rifles. A Corlin shield-bearer went down, holding a corridor long enough for dozens to pass. He did not scream. He roared. Explosions tore open hangar walls. Atmosphere vented violently into the toxic sky. Humans sealed breaches manually, locking bulkheads with brute force when systems refused to cooperate. One cargo ship powered up, the other didn't. Engine feedback spiked wildly, threatening to detonate the fuel core. A human engineer crawled inside the housing anyway. 30 seconds, she said calmly. No more. They gave her 29. The first ship lifted off under heavy fire as automated orbital cannons, running on degraded logic, attempted to track fleeing targets. Human gunners overloaded point defense systems, burning them out one by one. On the ground, the second cargo ship finally surged to life, but the hangar collapsed before the full ascent was complete. The ship tore free through falling steel and stone, scraping armor, venting atmosphere, losing altitude, and then stabilizing. Cheers broke out, short, interrupted, because Tharmilla was breaking apart. Massive fissures split the planet's crust. The mines imploded. Articulous residue ignited in uncontrolled reactions, warping gravity and ripping chunks of the surface into orbit. The cargo ships punched through the cloud layer, just as a planetary shockwave detonated below them. They didn't look back. In orbit, human pilots executed blind jumps, coordinates improvised, engines screaming in protest as space-time twisted around damaged drives. The stars vanished, then reappeared. Silence followed. The ships drifted. Systems stabilized. Casualty reports came in slowly. Too many names, but not all. Med bays overflowed with species that had never believed they would see open space again. Aliens cried openly. Humans sat quietly, staring at bulkheads, hands still shaking from adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. One officer finally spoke. We made it. No one argued. Behind them, Tharmilla burned. A dead world finally freed from chains. The cargo ships limped through deep space, running on patched systems and stolen technology, held together by exhaustion and refusal. No one celebrated. They counted the living. They named the dead. Human officers worked alongside alien medics, translating, improvising, adapting. Species that had never touched each other before now shared rations, tools, and silence. Trust formed not through words, but through memory. When the ships finally reached a neutral trade corridor, the reaction was immediate. Distress signals from unknown vessels triggered automated warnings. Patrol drones closed in cautiously. Data packets flooded comm channels demanding identification. The reply was simple. Former prisoners of Tharmilla, requesting asylum. The response took longer, because Tharmilla was supposed to be a myth, an industrial dead zone, a place ships avoided, a world officially stable under Vixator jurisdiction. But scans told a different story. A planetary corpse, orbit warped, residual interdimensional signatures, still bleeding into vacuum. The cargo ships carried proof. Sensor data leaked. Fragments of footage surfaced. Vixator installations erased. Entire fleets gone. Articulous signatures collapsing into nothingness. The galactic networks reacted violently. Some governments denied it. Others panicked. Trade guilds froze routes near Vixator space. Intelligence agencies flagged humanity as an unmodeled variable again. But among the fringes, among the enslaved and forgotten, hope ignited. Refugee species began reaching out. Whispers spread through black markets and shadow relays. Humans broke Ferrith. They killed the Vixators with their own gods. They don't leave people behind. The truth was Messier. Humans had left people behind, but they had never stopped trying. In human space, official statements were brief. There will be consequences, leadership admitted. We accept them. They didn't glorify the act. They honored the cost. Memorials were created. Humans and non-humans alike listed together. No hierarchy. No separation. The keepers of the veil took notice. So did others. Entities older than empires stirred uncomfortably. Because this was not an accident. It was a pattern. Humans did not seek forbidden power. But when confronted with annihilation, they weaponized resolve. The cargo ships eventually docked at a remote station. Refugees disembarked under careful supervision. Medical care expanded. New alliances were quietly formed. Not treaties. Promises. One Zerathi survivor summarized it best while watching the stars through a viewport. We thought humans were dangerous because they fight. He paused. They're dangerous because they decide. Somewhere far away, in regions untouched by Tharmilla's shadow, empires recalculated risk assessments. And quietly, they adjust them upward. Years later, Tharmilla was still avoided. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was empty. Scans showed no life. No infrastructure. No Vixator presence. The planet's core had stabilized into a cold, inert mass, its crust permanently scarred by fractures where minds and rituals had once burrowed deep into its bones. The Articulus was gone. Not extracted. Erased. What remained was a lesson no empire wanted to teach its children. The Vixators never recovered. Without Tharmilla, their expansion collapsed. Slave networks fractured. Client worlds rebelled. Their priest castes vanished, stripped of authority and relevance in a galaxy suddenly aware that their divine mandate had been built on stolen power. Historians would later argue about what truly ended them: the rebellion, the entity, or the moment they enslaved humans and mistook obedience for weakness. Among the survivors, life continued. Some aliens returned to shattered homeworlds. Others integrated into human space, bringing cultures, skills, and scars that would never fully heal. They spoke of the minds rarely. When they did, it was without embellishment. Humans did not call it a victory. They called it necessary. The names of the 6 volunteers who anchored the ritual were engraved on a quiet monument far from trade routes and politics. No symbols, no titles, just names. Visitors, human and alien alike, stood there in silence, feeling something they could not articulate. Not fear, not awe, respect. A Brahmin was never seen again. No further summoning occurred. No attempts were made to replicate what happened in Ferrith. Human records sealed the event under a single classification: irreproducible. Not because it was impossible, but because the cost was unacceptable. And that, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. Humans had proven they could reach beyond reality. They had simply chosen not to, unless forced. The galaxy learned a quiet truth that day. You can enslave many species. You can dominate worlds. You can even attempt to steal the power of gods. But if you trap humans in chains, they will break the chains. They will break the mind. They will break the ritual. And when the dust settles, they will not rule what remains. They will walk away, leaving behind only silence, and a warning etched into history.